In this lesson, we will have a look at taking a simple major scale and applying it to the fretboard in a way that allows us to learn and unlock the secrets of the circle of fifths. This exercise will give us a valuable insight into what is really an important referencing tool when it comes to songwriting and working with other musicians. To put it short, this exercise will allow us to determine which keys have sharps and which keys have flats and how to put them onto the fretboard. I will split this lesson into 4 sections. First of all, we will have a look at learning the major scale shape that we will be using for this exercise. Secondly, we will have a look at understanding what we mean by the circle of fifths. Thirdly, we will identify where the root notes of all 12 keys in the circle of fifths are on the fretboard. And lastly, we will put the whole thing together in an exercise that is great for building up stamina when practicing. Have a listen to this playthrough and pay attention to the modulation that occurs with each key change. For this exercise, we're going to use a straightforward 1-octave major scale, starting in C, the 3rd fret of the A string. Now we're going to learn that scale shape, identify the intervals that are used, and talk about a few ways to practice that can develop some good technique. This major scale is built up of the following intervals. We start with the root note, then a major 2nd, major 3rd, perfect 4th, perfect 5th, major 6th, major 7, and octave, which is a C, same as the root note. We're going to look at keeping our fingers down as we progress on the strings. For example, if we start with our root note, middle finger 3rd fret, when we play the next note, which is a major 2nd with the pinky, keep your middle finger down as you go. Same with the next string down, 1st finger on the 2nd fret, middle finger 3rd fret, pinky on the 5th fret. This will give us a good stretch in our fingers and it will help us develop some good scale playing technique. Let's play through the whole scale with that in mind. Secondly, we want to make sure that we're doing some good alternating picking with the right hand. This simply means that the first note is a down pick, second note is an up pick, and the pattern follows for the whole scale. This will help us develop some speed with our scales and to make sure that our technique is correct. So take some time to learn that scale and make sure that it comes comfortable to you. Try and pay attention to those things. Once we get to that point, we're going to have a look at moving that scale shape. For example, if we look to find a G, 3rd fret on the E string, and play the exact same scale shape, it will work. So we can do this anywhere on the low E string and the A string and keep the same pattern. For example, here's a B, same scale shape. If we don't know what the note names down here are as of yet, don't worry about it. This is what we're going to use the 3rd part of this exercise to find out. So next, let's have a look at the circle of fifths itself. What is it and why do we use it? In Western music theory, the circle of fifths is a referencing tool that is used to identify the key signatures of all the 12 notes of the chromatic scale. In simpler terms, it's a tool that's used to identify which keys have sharps and which keys have flats. When looking at the circle of fifths, we start at the top, C, which has no sharps or flats. If we move around like a clock hand, we go to G, which has 1, D, which has 2, and so forth. Every time we move around to the next step of the circle, we're going to go up in a fifth. For example, we start in C, the next one is G. G is a perfect fifth away from C. C, D, E, F, G. You can see the second one around the circle is a D, which is another fifth away, G, A, B, C, D. And the pattern follows until we get all the way around. This can get a little bit confusing when we get to the bottom of the circle of fifths. We have a note F sharp and G flat. We can identify them as the same things. The key of F sharp has 6 sharps, the key of G flat has 6 flats. Past this point, we now change to using flats until we get all the way back to the key of C. For example, we have D flat, which has 5 flats, A flat, which has 4, E flat, which is 3, B flat, which is 2, F has 1, and now we're back to our starting point. So this can feel a bit confusing or perhaps a bit intimidating when it comes to learning the guitar. We don't need to memorize the circle of fifths, we can use the fretboard to figure out what's going to come next. So the next step is to take what we just discussed about moving from C and right around the circle and applying that to the guitar itself. We need to find out where these notes are and identify the pattern that is used to find them. Let's start with C, which is the 3rd fret on the A string. Earlier in the video we talked about the scale being built up on a series of intervals, which was a root, major 2nd, major 3rd, perfect 4th and perfect 5th. So if we start inclusive at the first note, we've now found a 5th away from the original note. This note is on the D string, but our scale pattern only works on the low E and the A strings, so we're going to look for the lower octave, which in this case is the 3rd fret on the E string. We've already identified this before, which comes from the G chord. Next up we want to move from G to D, and we can do the same thing. Now we're in the key of D, and we want to do the same thing again, perfect 5th away. Gives us an A. We're going to use the octave in the low E string. So here we've developed a pattern and we've learned where the 5th is away from the original note. If you start with your root note on the A string, to find the next key, all you need to do is move directly up 1 string. If you start with the root note on the low E string, all you have to do is move down a string and along 2 frets. For example, the first 6 keys will be C, up a string for G, down a string along 2 frets for D, up a string for A, down a string along 2 frets gives us E, and up a string gives us B. The next place to go to would be F sharp, which would be down a string and along 2 frets again, but what I'm going to do for the purpose of this exercise is use the F sharp in the lower octave. The reason for doing so is to ensure that we don't run out of frets, and it allows us to play this exercise on an acoustic guitar or an electric guitar without any problems. We mentioned before that F sharp and G flat are the same thing. To find the next key, we're going to go down a string and along 2 frets in a similar pattern to before. And we work our way around the rest of the circle. Until we land on C. So although we started on this C, on the A string, we're going to finish the exercise with a C on the low E string. We're really linking up this pattern of fifths on the guitar neck with the sheet that we have in front of us in order to learn what these notes are called. So now we're going to have a look at putting this into practice and playing along with the track. So just to recap where we're at, first of all we learned the major scale that we're going to use for the exercise. Secondly, we had a brief introduction to what the circle of fifths is and does. Thirdly, we've identified where all these keys are on the fretboard, and the last thing to do is to put it all together. So from here we're going to take the pattern that we used to identify the root notes and place the major scale on top. Start with the first 6 keys to give yourself a feel as to how this exercise works. That will be C, G, D, A, E and B. Once you feel comfortable with that, add in the F sharp and the flat keys all the way around till you get back at C. In the description of this video, you can find 3 backing tracks at different speeds. Start with the lower tempo and work your way up to the full speed. Once you get comfortable with that, start thinking about the notes that you're playing. For example, when we play C, we will say out loud, C, G, D, A, so forth. The next step after that would be to try and identify what these new sharps are as we go along. We mentioned that C has no sharps, G has 1 sharp, as we can see from the circle of fifths, Interesting to note is that there is an identifiable pattern here that we can use to help us figure out what these sharps are called. If we look at G, G has an F sharp. The new sharp is always the name of the note before the root note that you're on. For example, when you move to D, you have C sharp. You need to remember to bring the previous sharps with you, of course, so when you're in D, you now have F sharp and C sharp. The same applies for A. We're going to bring through our previous sharps. So we have F sharp, which we gained when we went to G. We have C sharp when we went to D. And now we also have G sharp, which is the note before the key of A. So in conclusion, we have a major scale that we can now hopefully play comfortably around the 12 keys in the circle of fifths. This is a great way to introduce what is a potentially quite intimidating subject when it comes to playing the guitar, and it allows us to apply it to the fretboard in a user-friendly way that means we don't have to sit and memorize it off by heart. Whilst this exercise only scratches the surface of the potential of the circle of fifths, it's still a great way to develop some stamina in your playing and make sure that we're developing our techniques properly. Let's run through this exercise one more time at a slower tempo.